Hello there, this is Sohail Hasnie, your host at Energypreneurs. Cheap solar power, batteries, and electric vehicles are changing the transport and energy sector as we know. I bring in guests to this podcast who will help you with their ideas to navigate this energy transition. Thank you for joining. Hi, Dani. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here.
Maybe you can introduce yourself first. You're doing so many exciting stuff.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Dani Alexander. I am the CEO of the Energy Institute at the University of New South Wales. And I'm very passionate about the energy transition, having worked in research, but also innovation for government departments for a very long time. I'm also the current chair of the Energy Research Institutes Council of Australia and a current board member of the Energy Efficiency Council.
What does the Energy Institute do? Do you want to expand a bit? I know you also were with the Australian Renewable Energy Association, IRENA, right?
The role of the Energy Institute at the University of New South Wales is really to bring together the technology, capability, and research expertise for the university across all areas of energy. NSW has a very long standing history in the energy transition. In fact, Professor Martin Green, who had been at UNSW for several decades, invented the modern solar cell, or the PERC solar cell that's found in the majority of currently manufactured solar panels today. In fact, we also, through the work of Emeritus Professor Maria Scalis-Kazakos, invented the vanadium redox flow batteries. The role of an energy institute is to build on the work that has been happening over decades and bring together the new technology expertise and enabling areas of research to drive Australia's achievement of net zero. And we believe that is through technology, but also with a consumer first perspective.
What do you mean? Consumer first perspective and technology.
I'm very passionate about this area of consumer first principles. But while we work in technology at the university, and a significant amount of our capabilities in our engineering faculty, the largest engineering faculty that we have here, we truly believe that technology can change the world. It's important to keep the people who are using that technology at the forefront. Consumer-led energy transition is to understand really where those people are that are using the energy and consider their perspective when developing the new energy system. And it is a new energy system. So the traditional view of a large, generally coal-fired generator sending energy down the line to generally a small consumer, that paradigm is over. At this point, Australia is leading the world in the uptake of rooftop solar. And what that means is that with over 30% of households with generators on their roof, we now have a two-way electricity grid, and it just completely blows the paradigm out of the water. What I mean by that consumer-led energy transition is considering the perspective of people when we are changing the system, including issues such as improving the equity in the energy system. And so we do quite a lot of work around the technology, say in the social sciences to be able to support that.
Okay, I can see where you're coming from. But the interesting thing is the grid needs to be two-way and one-way flow no longer relevant. And consumers are generating electricity and 30% are residential customers. And we have in Australia now 35 gigawatt of rooftop solar, right?
That's right. The market operator expects that 40% of our generation by 2050 will be from rooftop solar. It's extraordinary.
It might happen actually faster than that with solar. 9 cents a watt panel. It's cheap as cheap. Maybe it's cheaper than chips.
It's cheaper than most building materials. If you were looking at something to build a house with, a solar panel is one of the cheapest building materials that we could use. There are very interesting advances in the solar area beyond the work that we've already done to be able to maximize generation from that cheap green generator in the sky.
Yeah, especially I have a house in Melbourne which have a 11 kilowatt rooftop solar and a power wall. I was thinking of putting the foot panels on the fences because they're very popular in Europe, especially in Germany. And I was told safety issues. The installer said, no, we have never done one. And I didn't have time to pursue. But if you start counting the fences, so I believe the 50 gigawatt may be achieved much faster than anyone thinks. And then what
Mm.
happens? Our system peak is 50,000 megawatt installed. Peak is about 35, right?
It's interesting. We talk a lot about peak, but as you say, when you're talking about solar, the interesting thing is actually the trough.
Yeah,
Fact that
but that gets filled up with battery approaching $50 a kilowatt hour. There's no trough because everybody store energy everywhere.
ideally, in the end, we'll be able to use that essentially free, particularly when you have it low enough, that trough, to go into negative pricing. You can be paid to use electricity in the middle of the day if you're exposed to that spot price.
The spot price, the fundamental of wholesale electricity market, still supply needs to match demand at any given time, and marginal cost generator sets the price. And that's why negative. Those will eventually go once everybody have access or ability to store energy.
Well, yeah, you're right. In terms of I guess the storage capacity that we'll have will influence the amount of not just excess generation that's driving down the price itself, but the excess generation that's going to waste. And I think it's interesting that what we're seeing already with a colleague of mine, Dr. Dylan McConnell, he's developed a new visualization tool to be able to see how much solar is already being curtailed. In many cases, it's just because no one wants to buy it at that particular period of time. I wouldn't say we're necessarily wasting the solar energy, because there is a certain level of curtailment that we would expect to see in a well-functioning market. But what it does show is that there's a missed opportunity if we were able to, whether it's through battery storage or just by shifting when we use our electricity, there's cheap energy to be had already that's not being used.
Yes, and then of course with V2G coming in, with the batteries everywhere, home batteries, future of clean energy will be very different than anyone can think of, no? And what's your view of future of clean energy, by the way? Where
Oh
are
my
we
gosh, my
headed?
view, realistic optimist, I like to frame myself as. Since I have worked in the energy sector, we were considering the very first solar plant to now, when we're seeing, 30% of the people in houses owning their own solar plants. I have got some cautious optimism that we'll be able to find the solutions that will get us to a positive future for clean energy. When you ask, how do I see that future of energy? I see it as vastly different again to what we had in the past. It is increasingly decentralized, democratized, and digitalized. These areas are so interesting to us at the university because what that actually looks like is not necessarily clear. So we can develop scenarios to understand how the technologies that underpin those 3Ds, technology is improving so rapidly that we can't be sure of what that will actually look like in the end. And that to me is the most exciting. Having seen over the last 10 to 20 years, the change that we've seen, I feel like if we were to look 20 years in the future, which doesn't even get us to 2050, it's very exciting. I feel very excited about the future of clean energy.
Yeah, especially one path is very clear, that residential as a class, which is 30% of total kilowatt hour consumed, right? Residential as a class might be self-sufficient with Australia with detached home in most cases, except the central districts, right? Once they become surplus, and an average Australian has 2.5 cars, and those cars will have a more than 100 kilowatt hour battery, and a typical customer consume 15 kilowatt hour maximum, and with energy efficiency, maybe even less in future. I see free electricity everywhere sitting there, right? That's
Right. Well,
must have
that's
a
right.
huge impact on the sort of industry sector, whatever you name it, right?
Yes. And I think when you frame the opportunity in that way, it is very exciting to think about the opportunity for low cost energy. As you say, we'll have surplus solar on many roofs and movable batteries where we could store or feed in at various times, less feeding in, but definitely drawing that surplus solar from the grid. It's with V2G, then yes, you can actually use it as an alternative to a Tesla Powerwall. Why would you buy the Tesla Powerwall if the Tesla Powerwall can power your car as well? And I think that the sector is aware of that opportunity, but the mechanisms to access that opportunity are not necessarily there at this point in time if we're hoping to electrify our domestic transport with EVs and use those EVs to be able to soak up that surplus solar generation. What is it actually going to take to be able to do that? Is it just the pricing signals? If people see cheap electricity, will they charge their car in the middle of the day? Is that possible? If they're driving their car during the middle of the day, what else will it take to achieve positive outcomes from the transition? Because unchecked, there are scenarios where it can actually go backwards before it goes forward. We continue to see solar generation be curtailed more and more. And we see the peak also increasing when people come home and plug their cars in at the same time that they put the toaster on the aircon and everything else. So you can actually, without thinking about it carefully, exacerbate existing issues. And I think that is very interesting to us. And thinking about how we can get on the front foot at the cusp of the wave of the technology's deployment so that we can actually make the most of it.
Yes, absolutely. Once people get used to these technologies and start using, like you're texting your husband sitting next door. I remember 30 years ago when I had my first mobile phone, I'm an early adopter. I read through the manual, there is an SMS. I was explaining to my wife and my colleagues. They said, why you want to text somebody when you can pick up the handline and call? Right now, I'm sitting outside. If I run out of my water, I'll definitely text, can I please have a glass of water? These uses were never thought of. I think the issue you mentioned is exactly the same, that pieces are being placed together, someone buying a car, someone buying a battery, and suddenly something will click and say, hey, as a community, this is what we can do. I think that's what you are trying, no? Bring all the technology and make people do the right thing or interesting thing that we haven't even thought about.
Yeah, I think I often think of mobile phones because when I was younger and I was at university, I used to sell mobile phones from a company that was the first provider of mobile TV. And I have to say, I did my best, but was unfortunately very unsuccessful selling mobile TV plans to people that thought, why would you ever watch something on your phone this side when you could look at it on a television? And yet I take a plane now and people have downloaded movies on their tiny phones and watch it. I think this is probably where my techno optimism comes from, because I've lived that challenging first phase as people become familiar with the technology. And now I'm living in the current phase where people are benefiting from it, having pushed through those first barriers.
Yeah, this is an extraordinary example. Why you want to watch on this when you have a big TV, right?
Yes, of course. And yet we all do that now, the YouTube, but also people are watching full films and series on their small phones. The phones, they're not as small as they once were, but the technology has vastly improved so that it's easy for people to use and that they're getting the benefit from it. And I feel like if we use the same principle in the consumer-led energy transition, we'll have the same success. This idea of making something easy to use and showing the benefit to the people that are using it.
Yeah, especially what has happened with the internet, that it's a fixed fee, but internet for all practical purposes free right now, right? People just pay, subscribe, buy. So when electricity becomes that, you pick a flat fee, zero marginal cost, because right now at a residential level, it's a zero marginal cost, those who have excess supply, but not at a system level. Gradually at system level, when it approaches zero marginal cost, then we'll develop product where we don't have to worry about the cost of electricity. I think once that penny drops, maybe real innovation happens, because you can drive from A to Z for free, because electric car is free, because your electricity is free. You can transport things for free if you can fly a drone. Because right now, still there is this cost. If that is taken out of our mind.
It's interesting. And I think, we're talking about abundance here. And it's a different conversation when cheap or free energy is abundant.
Yes.
And you're right. And the work that we're doing at the university is to build on the technology that we have worked on in solar for many decades to drive down the cost again, so that solar energy is abundant and the cost of storage won't be so much of a hurdle to shift that generation to different times of the day. But something that I am wary of as we strive for this abundant energy and the scenario where we don't need to worry about how much we use, which is around the resource utilization that we need to be mindful of. I think it is really important in the transition that we don't forget that the cheapest energy we can access is the energy that we don't use. And I am often coming back and reminding people that it's important to put efficiency first, which is not necessarily as exciting as some of the other technologies that might be out there. But in fact, what I would say is that some of the new technologies are allowing us to access much greater efficiency. The benefit of that is, and I think the reason why I don't want to forget it is because it is a very strong facilitator of the renewable energy transition. They don't compete, the energy efficiency and the renewable energy transitions. They're highly complementary. And in fact, you can get so much more from the renewable energy generation if you put efficiency first. And I would love to see that more in the public discussion, but I have to say I don't hear it enough as I would like.
I spent quite a bit of time on energy efficiency, including maybe the first when State Electricity Commission had a project on demand side management in Melbourne back in late 80s or early 90s. I remember CFL used to be $38 at the time. So we bought 50,000 and gave people away just to create awareness. We took people's fridges away, give them for free, bar fridges especially. But now, then 2008, I did a free light bulb distribution project for the Philippine government. CFL's still was about $1 at the time, made sense, right? I was a big champion of energy efficiency. Then a couple of years back, I was sitting on a balcony. I have a solar panel, a battery, a small system. I got up and switched the lights off. Then I came back. So why did I switch it off? From that day, I started questioning energy efficiency's future. I know it's very important that we should not waste, and especially large industry is very important. But I don't know if electricity become abundant and free, do you really need to worry, especially at a residential scale? Big question mark, because we don't care anymore. When you did a programming early days, you always have to careful about how many memory you use, right? In a variables. I used to do a bit of programming. No, I don't care, right? A mobile phone, when you make international calls, $3 a minute, Telstra, sitting on a phone booth, you had to have a list of what I'm going to talk, right? Now it's free.
So it's true. It is different, I would say. I like it. The two things I would say are two different stages of the time horizon. The first is we're not quite there yet when it comes to a fully abundant, cheap, renewable energy future that is flooding our grid. In this first phase, when we're talking about how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, I think if we were able to reduce the size of the elephant, it not only makes the targets we're trying to achieve easier, it also accelerates the pace at which we're able to achieve those targets as well. So on that front, carbon saved today is more valuable than what is saved tomorrow because it accumulates. Yep. It's valid to be making that progress as quickly as possible with the technology that we have at hand, which, in my view, there are a lot of energy efficiency technologies that are not currently being accessed by those who would benefit from it. The second point I would make, which is more a long-term point in the progress of the energy transition, is that energy efficiency technologies also will provide benefits to this future energy system that we see most likely. So As an example, if I could use the idea of this thermal envelope and insulation and the benefit of that, not only will it reduce the energy usage of a building, whether that be a residential building or a commercial or an industrial building, it'll also unlock opportunities for greater flexibility in the energy use of those buildings. For example, when there is surplus solar in the middle of the day, if you have a very efficient house that has very little leakage, you'll have the opportunity to turn air conditioning units on earlier, even without batteries or other types of storage. You'll be able to use the building as a battery in many ways. I think those other benefits to the energy system of the future can be unlocked by those energy efficiency technologies.
I completely agree. I've been championing energy efficiency for a long time. But I like the first point that you mentioned, that a kilowatt hour saved, the best option would be to send that kilowatt hour somehow accumulated to displace carbon dioxide being generated. So that's what I think we need to make our grids flexible, so that at a household level, maybe I'm 30% of what I need because everything is efficient. I have batteries. But how do I take that 30%, send it to the grid? How do we make grid more flexible so that it can go somewhere else and offset carbon dioxide?
And the benefit as well is it reduces the size of the elephant. The more that we can rely on those energy efficiency technologies to deliver that future energy system, the less we'll need to invest up front. We'll all benefit for that, because I think sometimes we forget that the poles and the wires and the energy infrastructure that we deploy, even though we might not necessarily see it immediately, we will see it on our bills or in our tax base eventually.
Yes, poles and wires, especially distribution. I don't know what will be the future of that as we have more cars carrying this, carrying that. But coming to your elephant analogy, I think in a different way, we should have more elephant, then we can get more work done, which we have not thought about, especially if you have abundant energy. It's like first time as a child, when I had access to a drilling machine, just a simple drill. Hey, I can do so many things. I drilled the whole house, but that need was not there without the
Yes.
drill.
And no, you're right. And abundant, cheap, clean energy unlocks so much for Australia as a whole. When we see the policies like the Future Made in Australia, and the opportunity for revitalizing a manufacturing sector in Australia, it's really hinges on this abundance of cheap green energy. We can use it for what we already do, but we can use it for so much more for the benefit of our economy. This is an area that we're very interested in at the Institute as well, and very keen to explore, recognizing that it will take consistent and concerted policy efforts to make that a reality.
Yes, especially with the way AI is getting into everywhere and robots. I watched few YouTube videos last night about what robots can you buy and what's are available commercially. It's amazing what is available right now and scary at the same time.
And yet and talking about efficiency, the latest statistic that I had seen was that the energy cost of the ChatGPT search is 10 times the amount of a traditional Google search. And in fact, Google doesn't even give me a choice anymore to have a non-AI option. So it can be the solution, but it can also contribute to the challenge as well at the same time.
Yeah, I'm not sure because we all have finite time, how much we will be using AI. Of course, AIs will use other AIs. I feel maybe that consumption issue is a bit overstated because only few companies are doing it on behalf of everyone else. Of course, they have to build super big things, but as computer becomes more efficient and energy efficient, I don't know. It's like an electric vehicle. People worry, oh my God, it will take the whole grid. Average person uses what? 5 kilowatt hour on electric car a day maximum? Because 30 kilometers, that's what average person drives in a day. I mean,
Yeah.
you can consume that on your new air conditioner or an inefficient dryer. Nobody talks about those, right? It's the same
No,
kilowatt
it's
hour.
funny, isn't it? No, you're right. It's funny what we talk about and what we don't talk about. We talk a lot about the impact of solar or EVs on the grid. We don't talk about the impact of air conditioning as much anymore.
If I am sitting outdoor and if I run a heater here just to give me a bit of heat, you run a 3.5 kilowatt heater. Within
Mm.
5 hours, that will be my whole week's consumption of my electric car, which I take just to go to the coals, right?
I think you're right. We need to keep it all in perspective. And it is helpful to highlight that discrepancy and make it clear where the biggest bang for people's buck is. So, as an example, we've done some work with electric hot water heating, particularly heat pump hot water systems, and the benefit that you can get from shifting that into, say, the middle of the day. Most often, when you have solar of your own at the moment, because there's not as many retailers offering products that can allow others to benefit from that. We do hope that in the future, retailers will expose those low prices to all customers so that they can shift that extremely large load into the middle of the day and not only benefit the person themselves, the household itself, but also the grid as a whole.
Yes, and I don't know how far the technology is. It's like setting up WhatsApp groups, whether you can just say community, can everybody you give IP address or whatever so that you can centrally switch it off. The way
Mm,
we had a system in Victoria that you could send a pulse to shut down all the water heaters for a few years under
mm,
a very old Y8 tariff. I'm talking about early 90s. From a demand
yeah,
management perspective, whenever system was, you could take few hundred megawatt just by sending a pulse and
mm,
all
mm.
water heater will just sleep for 2 hours. So
I think the technology piece there is so interesting because we can do the same now at the residential level, but also at commercial and industrial sectors. Very interesting. Many companies are very sophisticated when it comes to their building management systems and have the opportunity that they may not realize yet to get these benefits to their bottom line by getting cheaper clean energy as well. So that's an area that I'm very interested in.
yeah, I mean, looks like you have a super exciting job. So, is there any particular things you are very excited about?
Yes, the areas of innovation that I find most exciting at the moment are really about making advances to bring down the cost of solar even more. This idea of super cheap solar is on the horizon. We continue to see that dropping, and the research I see in the lab and having seen that has made it out into the world before filled me with confidence that we're going to continue to see an abundance of clean energy that is cheap as well in the future. So that's very exciting. Again, using that solar eh, for benefit to the economy is also interesting to me. And the technologies that will sit behind green metals and minerals, likely to be the way that we export renewable energy in the
Mhm.
future, is also an area that I'm very passionate about at this point in time. We need to realize that we are an energy exporter and we'll need to change what we do to be able to continue to hold that position as a global superpower in the energy space. The technologies that underpin that, from the supply of renewables to the molecules that feed into the green metals and minerals, are all very interesting and exciting that I can see developing at the university, but also in industry. From the grid side, I'm fascinated in this idea of autonomous self-healing grids. This
Mhm.
idea of building resilience is so critical, particularly in a future where we are likely to see many more extreme weather events, which of course
Mhm.
is distressing, but is also uh, an extremely important area to address early so we don't find ourselves in situations where people are without energy, which is critical for people to have access to energy. So the technologies behind this, whether it's AI or other autonomous control, and also the new ways in which to create mini microgrids within the larger grid, I think are very exciting to me. We don't have enough time to go through them all.
Absolutely. What about the electric vehicle space, the V2G? And I just saw today there's a just under $30,000 electric vehicle launch in
Mm,
Australia.
the dolphin.
So that means more people will have access to electric vehicles. Having said that, this transition, how do you help everybody to have access to that electricity? And especially
Mm.
V2G might create income for many people in a way, or even the solar, right? 15,
Yes.
$10 a day you can make just by selling electricity doing nothing.
And I think it's really important. We go back to this idea of the consumer led energy transition and equity principles within that are very important. So, if we were to use the example of EVs with an analog in rooftop solar as well, there have been some criticisms that those technologies are only available to those who can afford them. I think the important piece here to think of next is how we can leverage that private investment for a public good. So,
Mhm,
again, going back to this idea of autonomous grids and the idea of the millions of devices serving those
mhm,
autonomous grids is very interesting to me. The way that I can see it working, where we're able to leverage that private investment for public good, is that we are able to promote the use of those devices, whether it be rooftop solar or electric vehicles, to drive down the cost of energy for everyone. In practice, what that might look like is either establishing markets or technologies that allow people to charge their cars when there is surplus solar and drive down the cost of the energy infrastructure that can be half of everyone's bill. And I think if we're able to do that, everyone will be able to see the benefit. If instead we are more passive and we see how it plays out, there's a real risk that inequity will increase in the energy transition. For that reason, I feel very passionate about this consumer first principle, thinking about new technologies and the use of those technologies by people and how we can ensure that it's a bit of a rant, I know, on that, but that's where my head is at the moment, rather than the alternative is to take those technologies away from people who are willing to invest. And I just think that it's really wonderful that people who are not in the energy sector are willing to invest in the energy transition. And I'd love to promote that even more.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's like the early days of fear and all the propaganda by others is gone now.
Mm.
People used to, even I used to get questioned, if I put a solar, if it gets hot, it's going to burn my house down. So no one asks those questions anymore. If those questions are not even asked for batteries and electric vehicles, because range anxiety and all of this, I think it's created by the same propaganda people. So once that are gone, and you will see a lot of people will invest into technology for their benefits, and it will create public goods. The public system has to do is just collect those public goods and make it aware for others so that there is
Mm.
public benefit broadly.
And you say that you haven't heard some of those comments, but I have to say, when I installed solar panels, I did have a conversation with a neighbor about the fire risk. And when I talk about EVs, people are genuinely concerned about the fire risk when it comes to batteries in particular, and YouTube clips that they've seen with particular cars on fire. I think it's really important to address those
Absolutely.
concerns. And that's another facet of the energy transition, to build that social license, because without that, the consumer backlash that we could see may actually delay us for longer than we can afford.
Absolutely. Especially with the electric vehicle. We bought ours last year, and I think first time without checking, we drove from Sydney to Sunshine Coast, which is about 1,200
Oh, wow.
kilometers. He said,
Yeah.
okay, we found our way. And I did post on LinkedIn. I think that had close to 100,000 views and said, because I
Mm.
detail and I did not know. But I remember stopping somewhere and talking to people, and people will say, are you worried about getting a fire? It's been running so long. Should you just check in and stay somewhere because it's all heating up, right? And I said, I don't care. It's okay, fine. But someone thought about it. Is it okay
Someone
to
thought
drive
about it.
such a long range? Because it's a cumulative heat. I said, it did not come to my mind.
And I think, as you say, the more that we see the technology deployed, the more confidence there'll be in that technology. The trick is to get ahead of all of the concerns and make sure that the safety is secured so that we don't see any bad events that lead to that consumer backlash.
So,
and that takes time as well with the new technology
but yes
to
and
do
no.
that safety work.
At the same time, if you make it super conservative, you cannot do the technology right now, like a batteries. I think a 2 kilowatt hour battery inside the house, maybe even a 5 kilowatt hour battery eventually find a home, like a dishwasher and other white goods. But right now, I think the law is the batteries has to be wall mounted
Has to
outside.
be outside. It's actually the electric bikes that people are plugging in.
Yes, the dozy chargers without a proper BMS, right? That's what the problem is. You can buy a toy, if it doesn't have a property charge, it can burn any of the cells, right?
There is a piece around sharing the information with people who, I guess, are buying these products, whether they be the large Tesla battery that needs to be wall mounted or the electric bike that seems so safe, but it's actually something that you need to manage carefully to make sure that it doesn't have any adverse outcomes, not just for yourself, but also for the energy transition as a whole.
Just imagine, sorry, I should not even say this. If you put a battery, one of the shoddy batteries, bad circuit under your bed, that you will go for a ride in the morning and short circuit and burns down the house. The headline will be a lithium battery burned down the house in Sydney. Right?
Yeah.
You won't say a stupid guy did this. Early days of Victorian privatization, we had a case. Somebody went to a bath with a hairdryer and that person died. The issue was which distribution company it belongs to. And I was thinking, of course, to bath with a hairdryer. Right? But the headline was Kennett government privatization, somebody dies. I can't remember the exact, but remember I used to work for the government at the time. We had to answer that question from the newspaper. It had nothing to do with the privatization.
And being able to have trusted sources of information that people can rely upon. So if something like that does happen, they can go to that source of information and either get the information that they need to be able to make change or to feel comfort that what they have is safe and has gone through the appropriate channel.
That will be even more challenging, as Facebook just said they are not going to check anymore what news is fake, what's real.
For a university, is something that we take very seriously, and it's something that we're passionate about, is being able to provide that trusted source of information and thinking about ways in which we can convey that information, the evidence base, in ways that can be easily used, again, for benefit, if I were to go back to those principles.
Yeah, I think that puts you into a really interesting and challenging position to be the custodian of the truth, that people trust you because you're a university, you're a CEO of a company, what she says. And that's one of my reason behind setting up this podcast, that how do you bring that credibility?
Maybe if I were to give an example with the fire and its relationship to EVs, a colleague of mine, Dr. Matthew Priestley, has released a free short course on this very topic to help with sharing that trusted information source so that people can build confidence in the technology.
Absolutely.
So we try different mechanisms to be able to do this. We're always open to new ways in which to do it. And if anyone has any ideas, I am all ears.
Thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else you want to share?
I think there's plenty more that we could talk about, obviously, but I'm just grateful for the opportunity to talk with you today. And yes, happy to connect with anyone who is interested in talking about these topics further.
Thank you so much. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Energypreneurs. To continue listening to this conversation, please visit us at Energypreneurs. Thank you. See you next time.